So, declarations of interest. Yeah, okay, I'm Chairman of Trustees of Ocular UK, and once or twice I've had a meal out of Delcath. I've made a terrible error on my next slide. That should have been a swarm of bees, but I just couldn't get... Honestly, I really, really tried to find a decent photo of a swarm of bees, but in the end you got a dandelion. So, what are metastases? What is metastatic ocular?
That won't happen again in about 5 minutes' time.
I'm running, it just doesn't look like it. So, right. So metastases, they're secondary cancers. Stage 4 disease, as it's often described. Essentially, that means you've got new deposits of cancer. They haven't arisen all on their own. They've come from somewhere. They've come from the original primary. And then moved to distant sites. So how do they spread and they metastasize? Different cancers spread in different ways. Some grow directly through into adjacent tissues. Now, ocular tumours can do that, but it's rare. You've usually got many more symptoms. It's usually very obvious and picked up before it's growing out of the eye. That's a really rare phenomenon, I think you'd say, Bertel. Spread through the lymphatic system. Well, the eye doesn't have the same lymphatics. Lymphatics are those glands that you get up in your neck or under your arms or in your groin when you've got an infection. You've got them dotted all around your body. And many cancers like to spread through the lymphatics. The eye doesn't have that system, and we don't see lymphatic spread. Then there's spread across body cavities. So if you've got a tumour in your tummy, there's actually quite a lot of space around in your tummy, which has got a little bit of fluid in, called peritoneal fluid. So if you get a cancer in your tummy, sometimes cells drop off that. They swim around in that fluid, and they land on particular organs or the lining of your tummy. So they spread that way across body cavities. So you can see that in other areas around the lungs as well. And then there's blood-borne metastasis. So that's where cells break off and they get into the bloodstream and spread. Now, if you look at this melanoma here, you can see blood vessels all over it. The back of the eye has got an incredibly rich blood supply. So if this is one of those tumours that's got monosomy 3, that's made that change and has decided it's going to spread, then the way that it spreads classically for ocular melanoma is through the bloodstream. So why? Why do cancers spread? Well, the nature of cancer is that it is invasive. It's part of the definition of it. The cells have changed and they're growing in a different way. So they're growing into things. If they also have that change with monosomy 3 with ocular melanomas, then they also have the capacity to break away into the bloodstream and circulate. And scientifically, we can do studies looking at circulating tumour cells to try and find them in the bloodstream. But it's not just about getting into the bloodstream. They've got to get somewhere and land and take hold. And there's a really complex interaction with the body's immune system. And I'm delighted to say somebody else is going to tell you about that, because that's quite a tricky thing. But it's partly about the way the tumour cells are, how they try and con the body's immune system so they're not recognised as abnormal. And it's partly about the way that the body reacts to them. So it's a very complex multifactorial relationship. And then the tumour cells have got to land somewhere. So they've got to find a fertile field. And they're often filtered out by structures or by organs that have got a really rich blood supply or a lymphatic supply. So the body's got a few filters. The kidneys are one of your filters, but tumours very, very rarely end up in the kidneys from any source. It's really rare to see a kidney metastasis. Another really rich blood supplied filtered area is the liver. And the liver, we see tumours a lot. It's a classic filter. and the other filter is the lungs. Again, all of your blood has to get through your lungs at some point to get oxygenated. So it goes through the right side of the heart, pumped through the lungs, out through the left side and everywhere else. So the lungs can be a filter for catching tumour cells. But it's down to that complex immune reaction and interrelation as to whether they decide to take hold or not. So where do cancers metastasize to? There's lots of different types of cancer that can occur, and they often have preferential sites for landing. So kidney cancer really likes the lungs. Bowel cancer really likes the liver. Prostate cancer really likes bones. Skin melanoma actually really quite likes the brain. It's got lots of areas that like skin melanoma. Lung cancer really likes the adrenals. Why? I don't think anybody knows that one, but it does. Stomach cancer, cells often drop off that and they end up on the ovaries, and called Krukenberg. You know, they've tumours, they've even got a name for it. And ovarian cancer likes to spread to the omentum, which is a sheet of fat in the tummy. So lots of tumours behave in odd ways, and they say, oh, this is where I like to go. For whatever reason, the interaction between the tumour cells and the immune environment and the blood supply of the organ and the anatomy of how they get there works in such a way that different tumours like different areas. And to be honest, we don't really know why for a lot of them. The specifics actually, sometimes if we knew them, might help us to target different pathways and different ways of interacting with them. So immunotherapy and changing the immune environment is something that is actually got enormous potential, and helping your body recognize tumor cells, helping you fight the kind of thing that we're going to hear about more from IMCGP 100 is enormous. So survival for patients with newly diagnosed primary cancers. Any diagnosis of cancer is devastating and is terrible, but some cancers do exceptionally well. Testicular cancer these days, we've almost got it completely cured. Pancreas cancer, well, the results are absolutely dire, and this is for primary cancer. So ocular melanoma comes somewhere in that middle ground. It's not by any means as bad as some cancers, but as Bertil has said, there's that group, the monosomy 3 patients, who if you can identify them and know them, you know that they're going to do less well. So my background, once upon a time, in the happy days, I used to chop a lot of things out. Big lumps from the liver. I did a lot of keyhole surgery on the liver and helped change the way we do a lot of different keyhole operations, both Southampton in the UK and internationally. I also did a lot of major pancreatic surgery as well. I had an amazing and, I have to say, very complete career. Although it was a shame it came a little bit to an abrupt end. So why did a liver surgeon get interested in metastatic ocular melanoma? Well, there are a few reasons. Hopefully my video is going to play. Yeah. So ocular melanoma really likes the liver. I like liver operations. Okay? So there's a connection. The two of us were destined to be together. So this is actually the first patient that I operated on did a keyhole resection on for metastatic ocular melanoma, a lady from the Isle of Wight. She had a solitary metastasis. Really rare to see a solitary metastasis, but it can happen. And she went another 6 years after that was resected before she had any more disease. So if you've got resectable disease, it's quite nice to chop it out. Yeah. As I got involved with some ocular melanoma patients, I discovered that although they had a disease that sometimes you could treat surgically, they weren't really getting the surveillance in a lot of places that I would have expected. So most cancers, all that list you've seen before, pancreas, colon, breast, prostate, somebody's following you up, looking to see if it's spread. Because if the primary's already been removed and been treated, you've got to be thinking of what's the next step. And I found that a lot of ocular patients weren't getting that follow-up. Nobody was looking with an active eye, thinking there's something we can do if it comes back. Okay. Oh, I'm showing you the video again. I should stop doing that. It's nice though, isn't it? First time I showed it, I got a round of applause. Right. So, sites of ocular melanoma metastasis. This is a very old paper from MD Anderson. But they show that 90-odd% of patients have liver metastases, and in more than half of them, it's liver-only disease. And that's going back a long way, back to when scanning wasn't brilliant. Picking the disease up early with aggressive scanning now, I'd say that actually we pick up probably about 70 or 80% of our patients with liver-only disease because we're looking for it hard. Ocular melanoma is resistant to conventional chemotherapy. So these are scans, I think, from about 2008, 2009. And those scans are about 3 or 4 weeks apart, each one of them. There's June, July, August, September. This patient, let's call her Rachel. So diagnosed 2007. Eye successfully treated. She had annual follow-up with liver function tests and liver ultrasound. They didn't pick anything up on those. She had some other symptoms and got a CT scan. CT scanning isn't our recommendation as the best way of looking for this type of tumour, but it can see them when they're getting to a decent size. So she had liver metastases diagnosed in 2009. She had dacarbazine chemotherapy. She grew through that. It made no difference whatsoever. And she went on to have chemoembolization, which there's a little bit of evidence for. That's putting particles into the bloodstream inside the liver laden with chemotherapy to try and block off the blood supply to the tumours and deliver chemo. In 2009, it was for diffuse metastases or big metastases. It was one of the few things that we had to offer. But it was all too little, too late. When I look back at her scans, actually, she'd probably been operable to start with. It could have been treated with surgery that would have dealt with actually what was the major burden of her disease. And I was really disappointed that we had a young woman, that there were options that weren't considered, that were missed out, and that people hadn't been looking hard enough to find her problems. So for me, I think liver surveillance is essential. There's a whole talk about it coming up, so I won't say too much. But early detection gives you the best range of treatment options. We've actually got treatment options now. Going back to 2008-9, there weren't that many. There was chemotherapy that didn't work. There we had a trial of sunitinib that didn't work. We had surgery, which we've known for 20, 30 years. It, on average, gives you around 2 years of added survival. So surgery, if you're average, that means half of people do more than 2 years. Yeah, okay, so half of people do less, but if you want to have a chance of living beyond 2 years, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, actually surgery is something that you should really be in the mix. So ocular melanoma metastases can grow quickly. So an annual scan isn't actually going to do you much good, because if you want to pick them up early, you've got to be looking for them harder. And I think 6 monthly is probably about the right balance, but maybe even less. I mean, in an ideal world, I'd probably do 4 monthly. early stage disease responds better to treatment. It doesn't matter what it is, whether your treatment's going to be chemo, whether your treatment's going to be some immune modulation, whether it's going to be a liver-directed therapy. It always works better, and that's not unique to ocular melanoma. Ocular melanoma is, in some ways, just another cancer, and it should be treated the same. We should be looking hard for spread, treating it early, because all cancers respond better if they're caught early. So, attitudes to metastatic ocular melanoma. This is a grim picture, isn't it? I took this from an old surgical textbook, Bailey and Love. And this is actually a picture that they ascribed to pancreatic cancer, which they cheerily described as Captain of the Men of Death. What a cheery introduction to pancreatic cancer. But pancreatic cancer, actually, we've done very little for since that textbook was written. Even in the 1960s and 70s, we've come up with very few better options. We're just a bit better at the surgery. But ocular melanoma, we don't have to be quite so grim. I think attitudes are changing. So there's more out there. Part of what we're about with Ocumel UK is patient support. Patient support is also about holistic assessment. It's about ensuring that the whole team don't just think about the lump or think about the disease, but they think about you and try and put everything in the context of you and your needs and what you want. And that involves you having your say. Early detection is just such a key, and we're driving for having a better range of liver-directed and systemic therapies. As Bertil's already described, the eye surgery, the eye management, there are so many options, and it can be done brilliantly, and it can be done really well. Even if you're not having the genetics, the actual treatment of the eye with a plaque, we know is really successful. So actually, the management of the eye, whilst there are things that we would like to be improved to iron out the differences across the UK, actually we know that the eye cancers are successfully being treated in all of the centres. Yep. So then, what about metastatic cancer? So if you've got pancreatic cancer and you've got secondaries, we don't have any magic bullets. We've got some chemo that will add an average of about 4 or 5 months. But if you've got secondary pancreatic cancer, and I've seen unfortunately several thousand patients with that, your chance of being alive in 5 years is less than 1%. Stomach cancer, 2%. Lung, 4%. What is it for ocular melanoma? Well, go back to 2008, 2009, and I would have said it's around 1%. But now I think it's different. So there's another group of cancers where it's still really bad to have metastases. You don't want them. Nobody wants metastases. But actually, you've got a chance. And those numbers, again, they're much better now. These are kind of 2009-10 figures. But the change in all cancers, colorectal, breast, prostate, there is change, there is movement, and we're seeing better survivals. And I've met some patients with ocular melanoma who have remarkable and inspiring success stories. And it always seems to me to involve lots of people doing lots of things, trying lots of different ways to give you the options. So that's my dear friend Leslie Kirkpatrick, somewhere alpine, not a bad place to be. One of the things that she helped us drive for was the Metastatic Ocular Melanoma UK guidelines. We've got guidelines for the primary tumour, guidelines for the secondary. So Ocumel UK was part of the driving force behind that. Bertil was immense in helping us to get that process started and to help get consensus between the centres, because that was one of the things that was difficult with the guidelines. But we reviewed all of the evidence. When I say all the evidence, we went back about 30 years, every single scientific publication that had keywords like eye, ocular, melanoma, we looked at. So we sieved through tens of thousands of publications to get it down to perhaps about 150, 200 that were actually really relevant. And then we went through all of those in detail. So it's good to have guidelines, and you can't really read those, can you? No. Anyway, I don't read those bits either. So I've circled some things. So that first one says, have you got localized hepatic disease? That means disease in the liver. The next red circle is yes, that's good. Follow down a couple more lines, and what does it say? Chop it out. Yeah, it says it in nicer words than that. But the bottom line is, if you've got operable disease, there's no question, the evidence supports it, you should have an operation. And that remains the number one guidance for metastatic disease. I'm going to talk a little bit about patterns of disease and use some great words. So if you've just got disease in the liver, so if you're having people look for it hard, that's perhaps about 70 or 80% of people at diagnosis of metastasis. Some people it'll be solitary, pretty rare, but it does happen. Then there's another group that we like, and it's a great word, oligometastatic. So metastatic means you've got secondaries. Oligo means you've just got a few of them, like golf balls, very often. Sometimes a bit bigger. Sometimes it might be satsumas and marbles. But you don't have diffuse disease. You don't have the next group down, which is like having the measles in your liver. And we don't really understand yet the difference between those groups in terms of the genetics, the immunology, what makes them have these different patterns of disease. And sometimes you progress from one to the other. But they're important because it makes a difference in how you can approach it with different treatments. If you're looking at extrahepatic disease, that means disease outside the liver. Again, really rarely you can get solitary deposits. Occasionally you get dots in other solid organs, which might be one or two in the liver, might be one in the ovary, one in the adrenal gland, a couple in the lung. But that's a really important group that I'll be talking about later. And then occasionally we see really unlucky patients who have a kind of diffuse pattern involving many different organs, which is really difficult to treat, but there are going to be options. So this is a massive solitary metastasis occurring about 23 years after the original primary was removed. Didn't believe it was anything to do with the original primary when we took this out. But just because something's big, just because something looks a bit difficult, doesn't mean you can't do it. That popped out, like shelling a large pea. And there's enough healthy liver left to live. And that chap went about another 4.5 years before he ran into problems. So, other patterns of disease. This is a liver with some big lumps in it. Awkward pattern, too much to operate on. Hopefully this is the next one's a pretty slide. Yeah, maybe. It's supposed to animate. Oh, it's doing it. That's very nice. So, PET scanning. I've only put it in because it's pretty. That's the only reason I put it. PET scanning can show up metabolically active tumours, and it is good for melanoma. It doesn't show very small disease, but it does show larger deposits, and it's very good for picking up bone disease. We talk about something called the SUV max, which I think stands for Sports Utility Vehicle, but I'm not entirely sure. It's basically how hot these deposits are. So tumour cells take up glucose because they're metabolically active and they're hungry, they're growing, they're doing stuff. And so any organ in the body, like the heart, takes up a lot of glucose. The kidneys take up a lot. But metabolically active tissues, like cancers, can show up with PET scans. Go to the next one. So this is another patient, oligometastatic disease. Although not the prettiest pattern, possible to resect. So liver surgery's moved on a lot. Liver surgery's become quite safe. It used to be, if you went back to the mid-80s, Bertel's been in San Francisco. I often put up a slide from San Francisco General in 1986, where they reported a series of about 50 liver resections, and they had a mortality of around 30%. Absolutely dire. But that's how liver surgery was once upon a time. Liver surgery is safe now. Usually most liver surgery operations come with a risk to your life of less than 1%. There are 33 units in the UK that have got an interest in liver. But there's only 2 that really have dedicated interest in ocular melanoma as well. So there are lots of places where people will discuss your liver, and there are some fantastic surgeons, but you want to be offered all the options. And I think it's quite helpful to have a discussion in one of the centres where they consider all the options. So I've got 5. Oh, don't worry, I'm really quick now. Okay, so let's have another pathway. So this is extrahepatic disease, so outside the liver. In the UK guidelines, we managed to sneak in another little line that said patients with oligometastatic disease, that's a few golf balls scattered around, should be treated the same way that cutaneous melanoma is, because they seem to behave slightly differently. So this is another friend of mine. So I operated on 2008. A young lady again, early 40s, with teenage girls, friends with a friend of mine. She had an ovarian cyst, identified in 2013. She thought her eye had been cured. She wasn't expecting anything to come back. That wasn't an option that was really offered to her. She thought she was fixed. So she had a big nasty cyst on her ovary. Turned out that was an ocular melanoma metastasis. Went on to have more staging, and we found another big lump inside her liver. So it was actually the very last keyhole liver operation I did, was removing the right side of her liver. She went on and she had immunotherapy. Then she had lots of close follow-up. She got more recurrence. She had it in the pancreas. She had some other little dots. The little dots responded to further challenge with immunotherapy, but the pancreas didn't. So we took out the whole of her pancreas. Another year later, she got some recurrence in the base of her skull. She had radiotherapy to that, which treated that well, but she then developed a diffuse pattern of disease. And although she's had at least 3 rounds of immunotherapy, and she wasn't eligible for IMC-GP 100, she opted for palliative care in March. But there's something still working with that immunotherapy, because she's still alive. She's not great, but she's still alive. And she's seen her kids grow up. So we believe in cherry-picking that oligometastatic disease, take out the lumps, look for immunotherapy to deal with things in the background. It's all part of a multi-modality approach to advanced malignancy that's not unique to ocular melanoma. We're doing it in many, many other diseases. And it's combining local treatments, regional treatments, whole body treatments, systemic. We want to reduce the number of viable cells. We want to prolong survival. And we want to improve the quality of life through better palliation. We may not be curing you, but if we can keep you alive for years and with a good quality of life, then that's something worth fighting for. So cytoreduction, that's a great word, a simplistic view. The less disease you've got inside you, the better the immune system can mount an effective defense to what's left. The less chance there is of a clone of disease going out of control and going crazy. And sometimes you need time for treatments to work. Your immune system, it's not just like flicking a switch where suddenly your immune system says, right, I can kill it all. No, your immune system has actually got to build that defense, and it's got to build that attack so that it can take time. Patient with bilateral small volume disease, lots of little dots, no surgery for this one. Same diffuse disease, sometimes like little black dots all over the liver, sometimes little white dots. Other options, so you've got liver disease, it's not operable, and there you should be considering liver-directed therapy. So the guidelines, we struggled to get some of these boxes in there, but I'm so pleased we got this one in, because there's a slide I saw from ASCO, a huge oncology meeting in the States, and it was about Delcath, chemosaturation, flooding the liver with chemo. You'll hear more about this. It used to be tried as an open surgery operation, but that was a massive insult, blocking off the blood supply around the liver and flooding it with chemo. Delcath came up with a way of doing it through catheters, put into the blood vessels. It's still quite a procedure. In Southampton, we've done 164 of them as of this week. We wrote up some of our results with Moffitt University in the States, 51 patients, having at least 2 treatments on average. Now, of those, 49% achieved a partial or complete response. So that's quite significant. And then in another 17, we stabilised the disease for at least 3 months. 3 months doesn't sound long, but it's making a change. After a median follow-up of around a year, then we had progression-free survival, 242 days on average, and 273 days for the liver, with a median overall survival of getting on for 18 months. No treatment-related disasters. This is what's called a waterfall plot. If the line's dropping down, it's good. If it's going up, it's bad. So this is the waterfall plot for chemosaturation. And we've got people there with a complete response. I'll let Yanis show you more about this later on. It's not a minor procedure, done under general anaesthetic. You need a bypass team. Most centres in the UK can't do it. But when you can, it can be revolutionary. So back to my friend Leslie, who was one of the inspirations and founders of this charity. And she was somebody who didn't give up. She had proton beam therapy. She looked around as well. She always found the best. She knew that she needed somebody looking at her liver, so she wanted MRI scans, and she found the tiniest dot. And she went to Leeds and saw a guy who trained me in liver surgery once upon a time, because she wanted the best of the best, and he operated. Then he operated again. She got ipilimumab as she was getting further sites of disease. She went on and got a lot more disease and started to develop a diffuse pattern. She had radioembolization. This was before we had Delcath. So that's flooding the liver with radioactive particles. It works, not brilliantly, not as good as chemosaturation, but in some patients it does knock the disease back. She then had bits of her liver microwaved because they weren't operable, but there were still some bits left after the combination of immunotherapy and radioembolization. She then started to develop disease in odd sites around her body. The dura is the lining of the brain. And I think it was 2015, was it? She passed away, 2016. 15, yeah. So Leslie fought. She wanted everything. She didn't want to miss out. And she wanted to make sure that she wasn't the only one who knew how to fight, knew what to get, and had things available. So I'm coming to the end. We've got some patterns of response here, some observations. So first of all, things like dacarbazine, they don't work. Don't waste your time with them. Chemosaturation of the liver, I think, is the most reliable treatment for diffuse liver disease. I think we've got evidence for that now. And we've got evidence that liver surgery for solitary or oligometastatic liver disease is reliable and effective. I think those are all pretty much facts. Observations. Liver disease does less well with immunotherapy. There's something about the immune environment of the liver, probably the same thing that allows ocular melanoma to thrive there. That means that the immunotherapy that we've been using so far, ipilimumabs, pembrolizumab, ipi-nivo, they just don't work so well on the liver. They work much better on disease outside the liver. And one of the things that we think is that if you're having treatment to your liver, then that buys time for the immunotherapy to start working in other areas. And we're all in favour of cherry-picking extrahepatic disease as part of a multi-modal strategy where you get access to everything. The future. So we need more effective immune tools. IMC GP100, I didn't put GP in lowercase, forgive me. But treatments are coming through that are going to revolutionise our approach to this disease. We're going to need to work out how we work together to find the right moment, the right people, the right cohorts, so that more of our patients are surviving beyond 5 years and not just being statistics, but having quality of life. So, conclusions. Ocular melanoma, when it spreads, it's got an unusual pattern of disease, but it's not so odd compared with other tumours. And a significant proportion of OM patients do go on to get secondaries. High-risk patients, those with monosomy 3, and unknown risk patients, those who've never had a biopsy, they need to be offered regular surveillance. And we think MRI is the best way forward. If you've got somebody who's brilliant at ultrasound, then a really good ultrasound is as good as an MRI in many places. But you have to have the same person who's really keen, knows what they're doing, looking for it every time. So if you've just got your jobbing radiographer scanning you quickly, I don't think it's as good. High-risk patients need surveillance. Patients with metastatic OM need to be reviewed in a dedicated OM MDT. We need more of these around the country. We don't need 33, but we probably need 4 or 5. We need places that are keen, that are interested, they've got access to all the treatments, and they'll assess you holistically, give you the support you need, and support your decision-making. Because early intervention with a combination of cytoreductive therapies and immune therapies gives you the strongest chance of disease control and prolonged survival. Thank you very much.